So I'm almost done with this project, putting a new wiring harness in this 76 Vespa Rally. This is a US model Rally, which becomes comes into the story a little bit later. So I'm almost done, but I thought I would make a quick video of what I've had to do so far. And while things are still pulled apart a little bit, you can kind of see how it's all gone together. The short story is the wiring in here is original. I've had a few problems with it, and there are places where it's, there's exposed wire and stuff like that, and occasionally we get shorts or other issues. And I just decided I've rebuilt the engine and I've rebuilt the suspension. So mechanically it's really good, but electrically it was still pretty, just a little bit iffy. And so I got a new wiring harness for it from SIP in Germany, and the only harnesses that they sell are for the rallies either with no indicators or with bar end turn signals. And that's because the rallies sold in Europe never had indicators. And so since this was a US model one, I bought the bar end indicator harness, which would have been like a modification that people would have done after the fact to theirs. And at SIP, they told me I would just need to modify that to run the rear indicators, and it would be not a big deal. Turns out that that's completely wrong, and the electronics for the US Rally are quite a bit different from the ones from the European version. And so I had to make a lot more modifications than I expected, and it was a real pain. It would have been a lot easier to just make a harness from scratch. It's not really that difficult. You just need the right materials, wires, sheathing, connectors for the ends, stuff like that. And that's pretty much what I ended up doing almost completely. So I took what they gave me, but I modified it substantially to get something that was more or less identical to the original harness. So I pulled out the old wiring loom. That's that. So it's just a big pile of junk now. But pulling it out makes it easier to figure out what you need to do to duplicate it, essentially. And you can just use a multimeter with a continuity tester so that you can trace out all the wires and stuff. Scooterhelp.com has a US wiring diagram, so that helps. It's actually more useful when you have the harness in front of you than it is when you're just looking at the bike, because it's so confusing how some stuff hooks up. You can see that Piaggio took basically a base wiring loom design, and they over the years just added stuff to it over and over until they got to the point they're at now. And so there's a lot of stuff that you're just like, well, why does this piggyback off of that, and why are there two branches here, or whatever. It's just everything was a hack on top of another hack. So that's kind of confusing and annoying, but you start to figure it out eventually. So the harness all goes together, or the kind of center of the harness is underneath the tank, and down there below where the choke cable comes in, there's a plastic cover that covers that sort of cavity in there. So the cover's off, obviously, and this is kind of the center of the whole wiring loom. So the springy things there that are moving, those are the hooks for the cowls. And on this bike, those are also where the indicators hook up. So you can see way down in there, down here, that's the positive lead to the left side indicator, to the little peg inside there that the cowls hook onto. And then the ground is these two, I haven't hooked them up yet, but these two ring terminals go on the ends of the spring thingies and make a ground loop. So it's kind of ridiculous. I always knew this design was sketchy and not that brilliant, but this is even worse than I thought it was. And so then there's one branch of the harness that goes out here, and that leads to the junction box on the back of the engine, and another one out this side, which leads to the regulator, rectifier, the battery, and the indicators. And then this third branch here goes up and out the back. That's for the tail light. Everything else goes up the front. You got the brake switch leads.
which again are different on the US bike to the European bike, so I had to change those. And those have to be soldered in to the brake switch, which is really annoying. So before I'm finished, I'm going to have to drag my soldering iron out here and solder those leads to the tabs on the brake light switch, and then mount that. And then up the front, you've got one branch for the horn. So that leads in here, and for some strange reason, the brake light trigger like piggybacks here into the horn. I have no idea why. And then up the top, you've got the three other bundles. So one is for the indicators, so that's unique to the US. One is for the handbrake switch, which I think is also unique to the US. And then the other bundle is kind of everything else, headlights, horn, and just the everything else pretty much triggers off the key switch in here. And then the indicator stuff is just extra. So those indicator leads plug in, and just hang out loose in there. So if you've ever taken the headlight off one of these, you already know that the wiring back in there is pretty difficult. It's crowded in there with the headlight and the speedo in. So I'm already getting ready to put this back together and thinking, is this really going to fit? So we'll see. What else to say? So the regulator and rectifier on the US model is different from the European one. So not only are the colors that I needed different, but I needed an additional yellow wire. I still don't really understand electrically how this works, but you've got two yellow leads that come from the stator, and so those are two inputs. And then you've got this orange lead, which comes out and goes. The orange lead, which comes out and goes to the battery, and then back out of the battery. And then you got the purple lead, which is actually, so these are outputs from the regulator. So the orange lead goes in and charges the battery, and then the purple lead is an output and goes directly to the turn signal flasher. And then there's a piggyback off of that back into the harness and through the rest of the bike. So it's very confusing how the stuff's hooked up, but it starts to make sense once you kind of stare at it long enough. And then because I was modifying the harness, I had to put an additional ground lead here to go back in and hook to the cowl pegs. So I've got two black leads here. One of them is to ground the regulator and also the negative return from the battery. And I'm just going to piggyback another one on the regulator and run that in inside here for the pegs. Let's see, what else is there to say about it? I don't know. Installing it was a pain. What I should have done was removed the cables and housings from the headset first, because it's not actually all that hard to fish those up through the tunnel when you have everything out already, or even when there's just the harness in there. When you've got the tank out and all that other stuff exposed, compared to replacing those things when the tank is in there, it's actually not all that hard. But I was thinking it was going to be this big job, and so I tried to work around it and not remove those housings at all. But then when I brought the harness up through the the fork tube here, or the tunnel, and up to the headset, you have to get the harness hooked up, or you have to get it routed. There's only one correct way to route it, and the harness bundles, the wiring bundles, need to come out here, like almost at the center of the tube, and then the cables need to go above that. And it's impossible to fish one and then the other and get it all correct. And the harness, you're just kind of shoving up one bundle at a time and fishing it out. It's just a pain. So I ended up with them reversed, and I thought initially it didn't matter, but then you could see the channels inside here on the headset, which I had removed to do all this. There's channels here, which are for the wiring bundles, and then there are channels here for the cables and over here, and you can't reverse them. And there's not enough room in here in the space between where the chassis ends and the headset starts for those things to kind of twist over each other if you get them backwards. So you have to do it correctly, and I ended up finding it was a lot easier to fish the cable housings back out, at least down. What I did was pull them down to the horn cast. I had the horn pulled out.
then feed the wiring bundles up, which was way easier to do, and then pull the cables back through and just get them in the right order. So I took pictures before I started everything, so that helped to know where everything was supposed to go. And then the last little thing that's important is on this side, the brake and throttle cables that come up here and all the wiring bundles, or two of the wiring bundles, all have to go behind the steering column lock. So you have this little gap in here, and they need to fish up like behind that. So that's also kind of a pain. And you just, use, I used cable housings, actually, old cable housings to pull them through. I think that was a little bit easier maybe than using just a cable, but either way it would work, I think. So then with everything in, at this point, what I have to do is pretty much just hook stuff back up, remake all the connections. I've got the cables hooked up again in the headset, the control cables and stuff. So you can see I've got a crimp on connectors on all the bare wires here. And then my last big worry is just if it turns out that I've pulled if I've got too much excess wire up here, it may not all fit inside the headset behind the headlight and underneath the speedo. But we'll see. I think it's going to be okay. If not, I'll probably just shorten the leads a little bit, but I've got to figure out, sort of try to test fit everything before I crimp the connectors on so I don't waste a whole bunch of those. So that's it. Hopefully this will be done, or mostly done today, and maybe I can try to fire it up, but I keep forgetting other little things I still have to do here. So that's all.